A virgin CEO never knew a woman's touch until his fitness trainer made him learn, slowly, deeply, passionately. Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. Before the story begins, let me say something with love and truth. Some of you are not trusting James, and it hurts. He's trying his best to carry my voice, my spirit, my heart, and if he's not enough for you, just say it. I'll replace him. But please don't stay silent and then walk away. This family was built on honesty, so speak to me. I don't turn your back without a word. Now stay, listen, and feel this story. And when it ends, rate it. Tell me the truth. I can take it. I only ask for love and loyalty. Let's begin. With all my love, always.
Carlos Lara had built an empire worth $500 million, but standing alone in his penthouse at midnight, he realized he'd never built a single bridge to another human heart. The city sprawled below him like a glittering circuit board, each light representing lives he would never touch, stories he would never know. At 32, Carlos commanded boardrooms with surgical precision, orchestrated multi-million-dollar deals with effortless authority, and owned properties that kissed the clouds. Yet, as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, wearing a silk robe that cost more than most people's monthly salary, he felt as hollow as the marble halls that echoed behind him. The penthouse was a monument to solitude disguised as success. 18,000 square feet of pristine perfection, where every surface gleamed, every angle was calculated, and every room felt like a museum exhibit of wealth without warmth. Italian marble floors reflected his footsteps like solitary heartbeats. Priceless paintings adorned walls that had never heard genuine laughter, never witnessed the beautiful chaos of shared life. His kitchen, equipped with professional-grade appliances capable of feeding dozens, had never prepared an intimate meal for two. Carlos moved through his domain like a specter, haunting his own existence. The master bedroom held a king-sized bed draped in Egyptian cotton that had never known another's warmth. The walk-in closet, larger than most apartments, housed suits tailored for a body that had never trembled under a lover's touch. The bathroom, carved from a single piece of Carrara marble, held mirrors that reflected only his solitary reality. 20 years had passed since his mother Maria's death, but the wound remained fresh as morning dew. She had been his anchor, his safe harbor in the storm of his father's ambition. After losing her to cancer when Carlos was 12, Roberto Lara had thrown himself into business with the desperation of a drowning man. The warmth disappeared from their home along with Maria's laughter. Roberto's way of coping was to build bigger, acquire more, expand faster, as if success could somehow resurrect what they had lost. Carlos learned early that emotions were inconveniences in his father's world. Tears were weaknesses to be eliminated. Longing was inefficiency to be streamlined. Love was a luxury they could no longer afford. So Carlos became the perfect son, brilliant in academics, ruthless in business, successful beyond measure. But in creating this ideal heir, something essential was lost. He learned to navigate corporate waters with shark-like precision, but never learned to swim in the gentle currents of human connection. His days followed a pattern as precise as Swiss clockwork. 5 a.m. wake-up calls to review international markets. 6 a.m. conference calls with London and Tokyo. 7 a.m. breakfast alone while reading financial reports. 8 a.m. arrival at Lara Enterprises, where 200 employees treated him with the reverent fear reserved for distant gods. His evenings were filled with business dinners where conversations revolved around profit margins and market trends, never touching the vulnerable territories of hopes, dreams, or the aching human need for connection. Women had tried to enter his orbit, drawn by his wealth like moths to flame. But Carlos had developed an instinct for recognizing the hunger in their eyes, not for him, but for what he represented. Bank balances disguised as romantic interest, stock portfolios masquerading as affection. He learned to keep them at arm's length with polite distance and generous but impersonal gifts. Better to be alone than to be desired for everything except who he actually was beneath the designer suits and platinum credit cards. Physical intimacy remained as foreign to him as poverty. At 32, he had never felt the flutter of genuine attraction, never experienced the racing heartbeat that poets wrote about, never understood why people risked everything for love. His body was a well-maintained machine. Personal trainers kept him fit, nutritionists kept him healthy, doctors kept him functional. But it had never been a vessel for passion, never been touched by hands that trembled with desire rather than calculated interest. The irony wasn't lost on him that he owned half the city's most romantic restaurants, but had never shared a truly intimate meal. He possessed penthouse suites in the world's most romantic destinations, but had never felt the urge to share a sunset with another soul. His walk-in closet contained dozens of tuxedos, perfect for romantic evenings he had never experienced. Sleep eluded him most nights, not from stress or business concerns, but from bone-deep loneliness that no amount of success could cure. He would lie in his emperor-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this magnificent isolation was the price of the empire he had inherited and expanded. Sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, he questioned whether he was even capable of the messy, complicated, beautiful experience that others called love. His personal physician, Dr. Elena Vasquez, had been warning him for months about the physical toll of his lifestyle. During his latest executive physical, she had been more direct than usual. "Carlos, your stress levels are dangerously high. Your blood pressure is elevated. You're showing early signs of chronic fatigue. When was the last time you took a real vacation? When was the last time you had genuine fun?" The questions hung in the air like accusations. Fun felt foreign, as alien as speaking Mandarin or playing the didgeridoo. His idea of relaxation was reading financial journals instead of quarterly reports. His version of excitement was closing a particularly challenging acquisition. His definition of pleasure was seeing profit margins exceed projections. "I need you to start taking better care of yourself," Dr. Vasquez had continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had watched too many successful people destroy themselves in pursuit of more success. "Regular exercise, better work-life balance, and honestly, Carlos, some human connection wouldn't hurt. You're isolating yourself into an early grave." The suggestion of a personal trainer had seemed logical enough. Carlos approached fitness the way he approached everything else, with the intention of optimizing performance and maximizing results. He envisioned hiring another employee, someone who would arrive precisely on time, put him through efficient workouts, and leave without unnecessary conversation or personal intrusion. Another transaction in a life built on carefully controlled exchanges. As he stood in his penthouse that night, Carlos couldn't shake Dr. Vasquez's words about human connection. The phrase echoed in the vast emptiness of his home, like a stone dropped in a deep well. He had conquered every goal he had set, exceeded every expectation placed upon him, built something that would have made his father proud and his mother amazed. But he had never conquered the simple, fundamental human challenge of opening his heart to another person. Tomorrow, the personal trainer would arrive, another appointment in his perfectly scheduled life, another professional relationship to manage, another barrier between himself and the messy unpredictability of genuine human connection. Carlos couldn't have imagined that in less than 12 hours, everything he thought he knew about himself, about desire, about the very meaning of being alive, would be forever changed by a woman whose beauty would stop his heart and whose presence would finally teach him the language of longing he had never learned to speak. Chapter 2. She was poetry in motion, and he forgot how to breathe. When May Greta walked through his door, Carlos understood for the first time why men had started wars over beauty. He had been expecting another transaction, a fitness professional who would arrive punctually, conduct business efficiently, and leave without disrupting his carefully controlled world. What he got instead was a force of nature that shattered every expectation and rewrote every rule he thought he understood about attraction, desire, and the terrifying realization that his heart was capable of stopping completely. May entered her private gym at exactly 6 a.m., as scheduled, but punctuality was the only predictable thing about her arrival. She moved like liquid starlight, each step a symphony of grace and confidence that made Carlos forget basic human functions like breathing coherently. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with athletic elegance that spoke of strength, wrapped in feminine curves that could halt traffic and restart dormant hearts. Her skin was luminous, a rich, warm brown that seemed to glow from within, as if she had captured starlight and woven it into her very essence. It was flawless, smooth as silk, and Carlos found himself wondering absurdly if it would feel as perfect as it looked. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail that revealed the elegant curve of her neck, a neck that Carlos suddenly wanted to trace with his fingertips, though he had never wanted to touch another person with such desperate intensity. But it was her face that completely undid him. High cheekbones that could have been carved by Michelangelo, a nose that was perfectly proportioned, and lips that were full and soft and currently curved in a professional smile that made Carlos's chest tighten with unfamiliar emotion. Her eyes were the color of warm honey with flecks of gold, framed by long, dark lashes that made every blink seem like poetry in motion. She wore black athletic leggings that hugged every curve and dip of her incredibly toned legs, and a fitted workout top that revealed arms sculpted with the kind of strength that came from dedication and discipline. Everything about her spoke of health, vitality, and a confidence that seemed to radiate from her very core. She was athletic and curvy, strong and feminine, professional and devastatingly beautiful all at once. "Mr. Lara?" Her voice was like honey over gravel, smooth and warm with just enough texture to make it unforgettable. "I'm May Greta, your new personal trainer." Carlos, who had been standing near his treadmill trying to look casual and probably failing spectacularly, found himself completely incapable of speech. 32 years of vocabulary, multiple languages, countless presentations to hostile boards of directors, and he couldn't manage a simple greeting. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. May extended her hand for a handshake, and Carlos stared at it for a moment, as if she had offered him a live grenade. Her fingers were long and graceful, her nails perfectly manicured but practical, and when he finally gathered enough courage to take her hand in his, the contact sent an electric shock through his entire nervous system. Her skin was warm, soft, and when her fingers wrapped around his hand, Carlos felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. It was like the first time he had seen the ocean as a child, vast, powerful, and completely beyond his ability to comprehend or control. Her handshake was firm, confident, professional, but all Carlos could focus on was the fact that a woman, this impossibly beautiful woman, was actually touching him, and his body was responding in ways that made him grateful for the loose fit of his workout clothes. It's, it's a pleasure to meet you," he finally managed, his voice coming out rougher than intended. He realized he was still holding her hand and reluctantly released it, immediately missing the warmth of her touch. May's smile widened, and Carlos felt his knees weaken. "Dr. Vasquez spoke very highly of you. She said you're ready to make some serious changes to your fitness routine." Carlos nodded, not trusting himself to speak without saying something embarrassing like, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," or "Please never leave this room." Instead, he gestured vaguely toward the impressive array of exercise equipment that filled his private gym. The gym itself was a testament to his wealth and his commitment to having the best of everything. Professional-grade equipment that most commercial gyms would envy, floor-to-ceiling mirrors, perfect lighting, climate control that maintained the ideal temperature year-round. But having May in the space transformed it completely. Suddenly, the mirrors reflected not just his solitary workouts, but the possibility of shared experience. The equipment became not just tools for personal improvement, but potential stages for interaction with this goddess who had somehow materialized in his carefully controlled world. "This is an incredible setup," May said, her eyes scanning the equipment with obvious appreciation. "We're going to be able to accomplish a lot here." The word "we" sent another jolt through Carlos's system. We, as in together, as in she would be coming back, as in this wasn't just a single encounter but the beginning of something ongoing. "I should probably tell you a bit about my background," May continued, apparently unaware that she had just rewired Carlos's entire understanding of desire. "I was a track athlete in college, University of Georgia. Specialized in the 400-meter, which taught me a lot about building both speed and endurance. After graduation, I got certified in multiple training disciplines and started working with private clients." Carlos listened to every word while simultaneously trying to memorize everything about her. The way she moved her hands when she talked, the slight southern accent that made her voice even more intoxicating, the confidence that radiated from her like heat from a bonfire. She was telling him about her professional qualifications, but all he could think about was how her lips moved when she spoke, how her eyes lit up when she talked about fitness, how badly he wanted to know everything about her that had nothing to do with exercise. "I believe in functional fitness," she was saying, "building strength that translates to real life, not just looking good in a mirror. Though," she added with a smile that nearly stopped his heart, "looking good doesn't hurt either." Carlos felt heat rise in his cheeks and was grateful for his naturally olive complexion that might hide the blush. Yes, that sounds perfect. I mean, your approach sounds perfect. Not that you do look—" He stopped himself before he could complete what was surely going to be an inappropriate comment about her appearance. May raised an eyebrow, and Carlos caught a flicker of amusement in her honey-colored eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Lara. Should we start with a basic assessment? I'd like to understand your current fitness level and any limitations you might have." The next hour was both the most wonderful and most torturous experience of Carlos's life. May put him through a series of basic movements, stretches, bodyweight exercises, balance tests that required her hands-on guidance to ensure proper form. Each time she touched him to adjust his posture or demonstrate a movement, Carlos felt like he might spontaneously combust. When she placed her hands on his shoulders to correct his stance during a squat, her touch burned through his workout shirt like a brand. When she guided his arms into the proper position for a plank, her fingers against his skin sent shock waves through his nervous system. When she demonstrated a stretch and her body moved with fluid grace just inches from his, Carlos forgot how to breathe entirely. "You're quite tense," she observed, her hands on his shoulders as she helped him relax during a shoulder stretch. "Do you carry a lot of stress?" Stress. Yes, he supposed that was one way to describe the overwhelming, all-consuming awareness of her proximity, her touch, her intoxicating presence that made it impossible to think about anything except how badly he wanted to kiss her. "Work," he managed. "Business. Yes, stress." "We'll work on that," she said, and the promise in her voice made Carlos's heart race for entirely non-fitness-related reasons. By the end of the session, Carlos was a wreck, not from the physical exertion, which had been moderate, but from the emotional and sensual overload of spending an hour in close proximity to a woman who seemed designed by some cosmic force specifically to drive him insane with longing. "Same time tomorrow?" May asked as she gathered her things, and Carlos nodded with an enthusiasm that probably revealed far too much about his state of mind. After she left, Carlos stood alone in his gym, still breathing hard, still feeling the phantom sensation of her touch on his skin. For the first time in his adult life, he understood what it meant to want someone with an intensity that bordered on physical pain. He finally comprehended why people wrote poetry about love, why they sacrificed fortunes for romance, why they lost their minds over beautiful women. Standing there in the aftermath of her presence, Carlos realized that May Greta had just rewritten every rule he thought he understood about himself, about desire, and about the terrifying, wonderful possibility that his carefully controlled life was about to become beautifully, chaotically complicated. Chapter 3. Every touch was a sweet torment he'd never known, he craved. Carlos discovered that 32 years of untouched skin could catch fire from the simplest correction of his form. The second training session arrived like Christmas morning and a root canal appointment combined, anticipated with desperate longing and dreaded with equal intensity. Carlos had spent the previous 24 hours in heightened awareness that left him feeling like exposed wire. Every thought circled back to May. Every sensation seemed amplified in comparison to her touch. Every moment without her presence felt like drowning in slow motion. He had attempted to conduct business as usual, but found himself staring through windows without seeing, signing documents without reading, and nodding through meetings while his mind replayed every second of her visit. His assistant, Jennifer Park, had asked twice if he was feeling well, and his business partner, David Chen, had actually snapped his fingers in front of Carlos's face during a board meeting to recapture his attention. Sleep had been impossible. Carlos had lain in his emperor-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, his body humming with unfamiliar energy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the way she moved like liquid poetry, the honey gold of her eyes, the smooth perfection of her skin, the confident grace with which she commanded his space. He had never experienced insomnia caused by longing, had never understood how desire could be physical enough to keep someone awake. When 6 a.m. finally arrived, Carlos was already in his gym, wearing workout clothes he had changed 3 times, attempting to appear casual while his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. May arrived precisely on time, and Carlos felt the same breathless impact as the day before. If anything, her beauty seemed more devastating in the soft morning light streaming through his penthouse windows. She wore different workout clothes today, burgundy leggings that made her legs look endless, and a matching sports bra under a loose tank top that somehow managed to be both modest and incredibly alluring. "Good morning, Carlos," she said, and the sound of his name in her voice sent warmth spreading through his chest like expensive whiskey. "How are you feeling after yesterday's session?" "Fine," he lied, because telling her the truth, that he felt like he had been awakened from a 32-year coma and was now vibrantly, overwhelmingly alive, seemed like the kind of declaration that would send her running. Any soreness? Muscle fatigue? She was pulling equipment from her bag, setting up for what appeared to be a more intensive session than their initial assessment. No, nothing like that. Carlos watched her move, mesmerized by the efficient grace of her movements. Everything she did seemed choreographed, purposeful, beautiful. Good. Today we're going to work on functional strength and flexibility. I'll need to do more hands-on correction to make sure you're getting the movements right. She looked up at him with those devastating honey eyes. Is that okay with you? Some clients prefer minimal contact. Carlos's mouth went dry. The idea of her touching him more frequently, more purposefully, filled him with a mixture of anticipation and terror that made his hands tremble slightly. That's fine. Whatever you think is best." What followed was the most exquisite torture Carlos could have imagined. May began with warm-up stretches that required her guidance to prevent injury. When she knelt beside him to help with a hip flexor stretch, her hand on his thigh to stabilize the position, Carlos felt like he might die from the intensity of the sensation. Her touch was professional, clinical even, but his body responded as if she had caressed him with romantic intent. "Breathe," she instructed, noticing his tension. "Relax into the stretch." Relaxation was impossible when every cell in his body was hyper-aware of her proximity. She smelled like something clean and fresh, maybe vanilla and jasmine, and the scent made him want to bury his face in her hair and breathe her in until he was dizzy. The torture intensified when they moved to strength training. May stood behind him during squats, her hands on his hips to correct his form, and Carlos had to bite his lip to keep from making a sound that would have been embarrassing for both of them. Her touch burned through his workout clothes like a brand, and he found himself hoping he would perform the exercise wrong just so she would touch him again. "Your form is good," she said, her voice close to his ear as she adjusted his posture, "but you're holding tension in your shoulders. Let me help you release that." Her hands moved to his shoulders, strong fingers finding the knots of stress that had lived there for years. But the moment she began to work the tension from his muscles, Carlos discovered that stress had nothing on the exquisite agony of her touch. Her fingers were magic, finding every tight spot and working it with expert pressure that made him want to groan with relief and something much more primitive. "Better?" she asked, and Carlos could only nod because his voice had abandoned him entirely. During planks, she knelt beside him to ensure his alignment was correct, one hand on his lower back, the other on his shoulder. The heat of her touch seemed to seep through his skin and directly into his bloodstream. He found himself holding the plank longer than necessary, not from determination to excel, but from desperate unwillingness to lose the contact. "Excellent endurance," she praised, and the approval in her voice sent a flush of pride through him that was completely disproportionate to the achievement. The most devastating moment came during core work. May was demonstrating a particular movement, lying on the mat beside him, her body flowing through the exercise with hypnotic grace. Carlos was supposed to be following along, but he found himself completely mesmerized by the sight of her, the way her muscles moved beneath her skin, the focused concentration on her face, the unconscious sensuality in every movement. "Carlos," her voice broke through his trance, "are you following the movement?" He realized he had been staring, completely motionless, while she performed the exercise. Heat flooded his cheeks. "Sorry, I was concentrating, trying to understand the form." She sat up, studying his face with those perceptive honey eyes, and Carlos was terrified she could see right through his pathetic excuse to the truth, that he was completely, hopelessly, overwhelmingly attracted to her and had no idea how to handle it. "Here," she said, moving closer to him on the mat. "Let me guide you through it." She positioned herself beside him, one hand on his abdomen to help him feel the correct muscle engagement, the other on his back to ensure proper spinal alignment. Her touch was gentle but firm, professional but intimate, in a way that made Carlos's world tilt on its axis. "Feel that?" she asked, her hand pressed against his stomach as he performed the movement. "That's the deep core engagement we're looking for." Carlos felt it, but he also felt the warmth of her palm through his shirt, the strength in her fingers, the way her touch seemed to awaken nerve endings he hadn't known existed. He managed a strangled yes, and hoped she would attribute his breathlessness to the exercise rather than to the overwhelming effect of her proximity. By the end of the session, Carlos was a wreck. His body hummed with unfamiliar sensations, his skin felt hypersensitive wherever she had touched him, and his heart was beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. He had never experienced anything like the sweet torment of wanting someone so badly, while having no idea how to express it, no roadmap for navigating the intensity of what he was feeling. "You did great today," May said as she packed up her equipment. "Your body is responding really well to the training. Same time tomorrow." Carlos nodded, not trusting himself to speak, without revealing the depth of his longing. After she left, he stood in his gym for a long time, touching his shoulder where her hand had lingered during the final stretch, trying to memorize the sensation. He was beginning to understand that May Greta was not just disrupting his fitness routine, she was systematically dismantling every defense he had built around his heart. And the most terrifying part was that he wanted her to. For the first time in his life, Carlos was willing to risk the carefully controlled perfection of his existence for the chaotic, beautiful possibility of letting someone in. That night, lying in his bed with his skin still humming from her touch, Carlos finally understood what poets meant when they wrote about sweet agony, about wanting someone so intensely it felt like dying and being reborn simultaneously. He was falling in love with May Greta, and every touch was both salvation and the most exquisite torture he had ever experienced. Chapter 4. He fell in love, the way flowers turn toward light, naturally and completely. Carlos realized he was in love when May's absence hurt more than any physical pain he'd ever endured. 3 weeks into their training sessions, Carlos's entire existence had reorganized itself around May's presence. His days became a countdown to 6 a.m., hours measured not in meetings or deals or profit margins, but in the space between one session and the next. He found himself setting multiple alarms not from fear of oversleeping, but because anticipation was so intense it kept him awake most nights. The transformation was as subtle as it was complete. His penthouse, once a monument to successful solitude, had begun to feel like a stage awaiting its leading lady. The gym had become sacred ground where daily miracles occurred. Carlos found himself arriving earlier each morning, not to prepare for workouts, but to savor the anticipation, to exist in the space where she would soon materialize. He had started having breakfast prepared each morning, not his usual efficient protein shake and vitamin regimen, but actual food that required plates and silverware and the kind of presentation that might tempt someone to linger. Fresh pastries from the French bakery 12 blocks away, exotic fruits arranged like edible art, coffee beans flown in from a small farm in Colombia that produced what his personal shopper assured him was the finest brew available anywhere in the world. The first time he had gathered the courage to ask May to stay for breakfast, his hands had actually trembled as he extended the invitation. "I have fresh croissants," he had said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "And coffee. Really good coffee. If you have time, no pressure. I just thought, if you were hungry." Her smile had been warm enough to power the city grid. "I'd love to, Carlos. Thank you." Those breakfast conversations had become the highlight of his existence. Sitting across from May at his dining table, watching her enjoy the food he had carefully selected, listening to her talk about her dreams and aspirations, it was better than any drug, more addictive than any vice. He learned that she wanted to open a wellness center in underserved communities, providing fitness and nutrition education to families who couldn't afford traditional gym memberships. She spoke about her vision with such passion that Carlos found himself wanting to fund every dream she had ever conceived. He discovered that she had grown up in Atlanta, raised by grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 19. She had become guardian to her younger brother Zion, putting him through college while building her own career. The love in her voice when she talked about Zion was evident, and Carlos found himself jealous of a young man he had never met simply because he held such an important place in May's heart. "He's in his 3rd year of medical school now," May said one morning, her face glowing with pride. "Wants to be a pediatric surgeon. He's brilliant, much smarter than I ever was." Carlos wanted to tell her that intelligence came in many forms, that her emotional intelligence and intuitive understanding of people was its own kind of brilliance, that watching her work with him had revealed a depth of insight that no textbook could teach. But expressing such thoughts felt too revealing, too close to a confession of feelings he wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Instead, he found other ways to show his growing devotion. When she mentioned loving to read during her downtime, he had his assistant research her favorite genres and began having carefully selected books delivered to her apartment. When she expressed frustration about a piece of equipment at another client's gym, he had the same equipment installed in his own gym within 48 hours, just in case she needed it for their sessions. The gifts were always thoughtful, never excessive enough to make her uncomfortable, but each one was chosen with the kind of attention to detail that Carlos usually reserved for multi-million-dollar acquisitions. A high-end workout bag when he noticed her current one was wearing thin, premium athletic wear from a sustainable company she had mentioned admiring, a subscription to a wellness magazine she had browsed during one of their conversations. May accepted each gift with grace and genuine appreciation, but Carlos began to notice that she was studying him with increasing curiosity. Sometimes he would catch her watching him with those perceptive honey eyes, and he wondered if she could see the depth of what he was feeling, if his careful control was slipping enough to reveal the truth. The truth was that Carlos was completely, hopelessly, overwhelmingly in love. It wasn't just her beauty, though she grew more stunning to him with each passing day. It wasn't just her touch, though every professional contact left him aching for more. It was everything about her, the way she laughed at her own jokes, the concentration on her face when she was designing a new workout routine, the gentle way she corrected his form without making him feel inadequate. He loved her confidence, the way she moved through the world with purpose and grace. He loved her compassion, evident in every story she told about her clients or her brother. He loved her intelligence, sharp and intuitive, and completely unpretentious. He loved her strength, both physical and emotional, the resilience that had carried her through loss and responsibility, and the challenges of building a career in a competitive field. Most of all, he loved the way she made him feel, alive in a way he had never experienced, aware of possibilities he had never imagined, hopeful about a future that included more than just business success and material accumulation. Carlos began to understand why people wrote songs about love, why they abandoned practical considerations for romantic impulses, why they spoke about finding their other half. May didn't complete him. He was learning that he was already complete. But she illuminated parts of himself he hadn't known existed. She made him want to be better, not just successful, but genuinely good. She made him want to matter to someone beyond his net worth and business acumen. The realization that he was in love came during their 4th week of training. May had been delayed by a previous client and arrived 20 minutes late, breathless and apologetic. Carlos had spent those 20 minutes in a state of near panic, convinced that something terrible had happened to her, that she had decided to stop coming, that he had somehow driven her away. When she finally appeared in his doorway, her cheeks flushed from hurrying, her hair slightly mussed from the wind, Carlos felt relief so profound it made his knees weak. The intensity of his reaction terrified him. The thought of losing her, of returning to his previous existence without her presence to illuminate his days, was unbearable. "I'm so sorry," she said, still catching her breath. "My previous client had a minor injury, and I couldn't leave until we made sure he was okay." "It's fine," Carlos said, though fine was the last thing he had been. "Are you okay? Do you need anything? Water? A moment to rest?" She paused in her unpacking, studying his face with those perceptive eyes. "Carlos, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." He almost laughed at how close to the truth that was. For 20 minutes he had seen the ghost of his future without her, and it had been haunting beyond description. "I'm perfect now," he said, and realized that for the first time in his adult life, that was completely true. That morning's workout was different. Carlos found himself watching May with new understanding, seeing not just the woman who had awakened his body to the possibility of desire, but the person he wanted to spend his life learning about. He wanted to know her favorite color, her childhood memories, her secret fears, her wildest dreams. He wanted to be the person she turned to when she was happy, the one she trusted with her vulnerabilities, the man who could make her laugh when she was sad. During breakfast, as he watched her add cream to her coffee with the same graceful efficiency she brought to everything else, Carlos felt the words building in his chest like pressure behind a dam. He wanted to tell her that she had become the center of his universe, that her smile was the first thing he thought about when he woke up, and the last thing he pictured before falling asleep, that he was completely, irrevocably in love with her. But fear held him back. Fear that she would see his confession as inappropriate given their professional relationship. Fear that his inexperience with love would make him seem foolish or inadequate. Fear that she would realize how completely out of his depth he was when it came to matters of the heart. So instead, he savored the moment. May sitting across from him in the morning light, her presence transforming his sterile penthouse into something warm and alive, her very existence proving that miracles were possible and that sometimes, if you were incredibly fortunate, they showed up at your door wearing workout clothes and carrying the power to change your entire world. As she prepared to leave that morning, May paused at the door. "Carlos, can I ask you something?" His heart stopped. "Of course. You seem different lately, happier, I think. Is everything okay? I mean, is the training helping with your stress levels?" Carlos looked at her, this beautiful, perceptive woman who had unknowingly become his entire reason for believing in happiness, and smiled. "Everything is perfect, May. Better than I ever thought possible." She returned his smile, and Carlos felt that familiar flutter in his chest, the sensation that had become as natural as breathing. He was in love, completely and utterly in love, and for the first time in his life, he understood that some risks were worth taking, some walls were worth tearing down, and some hearts were worth the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of being opened completely. Chapter 5. Love made him brave, but inexperience made him stumble. Carlos had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but asking May to dinner required more courage than he'd ever needed in his life. 6 weeks into their training relationship, Carlos had become a man divided. During business hours, he remained the sharp, decisive executive who commanded boardrooms and closed impossible deals with ruthless efficiency. But the moment 6 a.m. approached, he transformed into someone unrecognizable, nervous, hopeful, completely at the mercy of emotions he had never experienced and desires he was only beginning to understand. The crisis that would change everything began when Harrison Blackwell, Carlos's longtime business rival, launched a hostile takeover attempt on one of Carlos's most prized properties, the Meridian Tower. This luxury residential building represented not just significant revenue, but also Carlos's first independent acquisition, the project that had proven to his father and himself that he was more than just an heir apparent. The attack was sophisticated and well-funded, targeting what Blackwell knew was more than just a business asset. The Meridian Tower held emotional significance for Carlos, representing his evolution from his father's shadow into his own success. Blackwell had waited for the perfect moment to strike, using insider information and leveraging relationships Carlos had considered secure. Carlos should have been consumed by the business crisis. In the past, he would have locked himself in his office for days, sleeping on the couch, existing on nothing but caffeine and determination until he had outmaneuvered his opponent. But now, even in the midst of what could be a devastating financial loss, Carlos found himself thinking primarily about May. She had become his anchor in the storm. When stress meetings ran late into the evening, he counted the hours until he would see her again. When his lawyers delivered bad news about Blackwell's increasingly successful maneuvers, Carlos's first thought was how much he needed May's calming presence, her grounding influence, her simple ability to make everything else fade into background noise. For the first time in his professional life, Carlos left important meetings early to ensure he wouldn't miss their 6 a.m. sessions. He found himself calling strategic pauses in negotiations, not because he needed to consult with advisors, but because he wanted to text May a good morning message. His business partners began to notice that their usually laser-focused leader seemed distracted, though they couldn't identify the source of his apparent preoccupation. The truth was that Carlos had discovered something more important than money, more valuable than real estate, more essential than his business empire. He had found someone who made him want to be worthy of love, and that realization was both terrifying and liberating. May noticed the change in him immediately. "You're carrying extra tension today," she observed during their Thursday session, her hands working magic on the knots in his shoulders. "Is everything all right?" Her touch was becoming both salvation and sweet torture. Each professional contact sent electricity through his nervous system, but now he also found himself seeking her presence for emotional comfort in ways that had nothing to do with physical attraction and everything to do with the peace she brought to his chaotic thoughts. "Business challenges," he said, which was true but completely inadequate to describe the upheaval Blackwell's attack had created in his carefully ordered world. "Want to talk about it?" May's hands stilled on his shoulders, and Carlos felt the loss of her touch like a physical ache. The offer was simple, casual even, but it hit Carlos with unexpected force. In his entire adult life, no one had ever offered to simply listen to his problems without an agenda. Business associates wanted information they could use. Employees wanted reassurance that their jobs were secure. His father had always approached Carlos's challenges as opportunities to dispense advice or criticism. But May was offering something different, a safe space to voice his concerns, no strings attached, no judgment implied. The generosity of it made Carlos's chest tight with emotion. "It's complicated," he said, then found himself explaining the entire situation. He told her about the Meridian Tower, about its significance beyond mere profit margins, about Blackwell's calculated attack on something Carlos valued. He told her about the stress of fighting a battle on multiple fronts, about the pressure to maintain his business reputation while personally feeling more vulnerable than he had since childhood. May listened without interrupting, her honey eyes focused completely on his face, her expression reflecting genuine concern and understanding. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "It sounds like this isn't just about money," she said, her insight cutting straight to the heart of what Carlos hadn't been able to articulate to his lawyers or business advisors. "It's about something this person is trying to take away from you that matters on a deeper level." The accuracy of her observation stunned him. "Yes," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "Exactly that." "Then you'll fight for it," she said with quiet confidence. "Because you're stronger than you realize, Carlos, and some things are worth fighting for." The way she said his name, with such certainty and warmth, made Carlos want to pull her into his arms and kiss her until they were both breathless. Instead, he nodded and tried to memorize the moment, May looking at him with complete faith in his strength, her presence making him feel capable of conquering any challenge. It was during that conversation that Carlos realized he wanted to share more than just his business concerns with May. He wanted to share meals, conversations, quiet moments, and the 1,000 small experiences that made up a life. He wanted to take her to dinner not as a trainer and client, but as a man and woman exploring the possibility of something deeper. The decision to ask her to dinner should have been simple. Carlos was successful, wealthy, and not entirely unaware that women generally found him attractive. But his complete lack of experience with romantic relationships made the prospect terrifying. He had never asked anyone on a date, had never navigated the delicate territory between professional relationship and personal interest, had never risked rejection from someone whose opinion mattered to him. He spent 3 days planning the invitation. He researched restaurants that would be impressive but not overwhelming, venues that would provide privacy for conversation but not seem overly intimate for a first date. He practiced different approaches in his bathroom mirror, trying to find the right balance between confidence and casualness, between expressing interest and respecting boundaries. Friday morning arrived with Carlos more nervous than he had been before any business presentation. His hands actually shook as he prepared for May's arrival, and he changed his workout clothes twice, unable to decide if he was trying too hard or not hard enough. May arrived precisely on time, as always, and Carlos felt the familiar rush of joy mixed with nervous energy that her presence always brought. She looked particularly beautiful that morning. Her hair caught the sunlight streaming through his windows, and her smile seemed brighter than usual. "You seem better today," she observed as they began their warm-up routine. "Less stressed. Did things improve with your business situation?" "Some," Carlos said, which was true. His lawyers had found new angles to approach Blackwell's takeover attempt, and Carlos had discovered reserves of determination he hadn't known he possessed. But the real reason for his improved mood was standing in front of him, unconsciously radiant in the morning light. They moved through their workout routine, but Carlos found himself even more distracted than usual. Every time May touched him to correct his form, he felt the words building in his chest. Ask her to dinner. Just do it. The worst she can say is no. But the worst she could say was no, and that possibility felt catastrophic. May had become so essential to his daily happiness that the thought of her rejection, of potentially damaging their current relationship, made his palms sweat with anxiety. During their post-workout stretching, as May helped him with a particularly challenging hip flexor stretch, Carlos finally gathered his courage. "May," he said, his voice coming out slightly strangled from the effort of forcing the words past his nervousness. She was focused on guiding the stretch, her hands warm and steady on his leg. "Would you—" He stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me, tonight, or whenever you're free. I know a place that has excellent seafood, or if you don't like seafood, we could go somewhere else. Italian, maybe? Or whatever you prefer. I just thought we could talk. Away from here, just talk." The words tumbled out in a rush, his usual composed delivery completely abandoned in favor of nervous honesty. May's hand stilled on his leg, and Carlos felt his heart stop beating while he waited for her response. She looked up at him, those perceptive honey eyes searching his face, and Carlos was certain she could see everything. His inexperience, his nervousness, his overwhelming desire to be more than just her client. "Carlos," she said softly, and he braced himself for gentle rejection, for the careful establishment of professional boundaries, for the end of the most beautiful chapter of his life. Instead, she smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made his heart restart with a rhythm that felt like celebration. "I would love to have dinner with you." The relief was so intense that Carlos actually felt dizzy. "Really? Really?" Her smile widened, and Carlos thought he might float right off the stretching mat. "What time?" As they made plans, 7 p.m. at Oceana, a restaurant Carlos had chosen for its reputation for excellent food and intimate atmosphere, Carlos felt like he was living in a dream. May Greta, the most beautiful woman he had ever encountered, had agreed to have dinner with him. Not a business meal, not a casual coffee, but an actual date with romantic possibilities. After she left, Carlos stood in his gym, grinning like an idiot, already planning every detail of their evening together. He had no idea how to be on a date, no experience with romantic conversation or the delicate dance of courtship, but for the first time in his life, Carlos was willing to risk looking foolish for the chance to win something infinitely more valuable than any business deal. He was going to dinner with May Greta, and the possibility that she might see him as more than just a client filled him with a hope so bright it could have powered the entire city. Chapter 6. In darkness, he found the courage to speak his heart. The city blackout lasted 3 hours, but in that time, Carlos discovered that some lights could only be found in another person's eyes. Their first real date had begun with all the nervous energy of a man who had planned every detail with military precision and the anxiety of someone navigating uncharted romantic territory. Carlos had arrived at Oceana 30 minutes early, unable to remain still in his penthouse, while counting down the minutes until he would see May in a setting that had nothing to do with fitness equipment and everything to do with possibilities. He had chosen his outfit with unprecedented care, a navy blue suit that his personal shopper assured him struck the perfect balance between sophisticated and approachable, a white shirt that emphasized his olive complexion, and a tie that required 15 minutes of selection because he wanted everything flawless. His hair had been styled with extra attention, and he had even applied cologne, something he rarely bothered with for business meetings. May arrived precisely on time, and Carlos felt his breath catch in his throat. She wore a dress that was elegant without being overly formal, deep emerald green that made her skin glow like burnished gold, with a silhouette that was both sophisticated and stunning. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she had traded her usual athletic confidence for something more quietly radiant. She was breathtaking in workout clothes, but dressed for an evening out, she was absolutely devastating. "You look incredible," Carlos said as she approached their table, and immediately worried that he sounded too eager, too obvious in his admiration. "Thank you," May replied, her smile warm and genuine. "You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Lara." The dinner had started beautifully. They talked about everything except fitness, her childhood in Atlanta, his travels for business, her favorite books, his secret passion for architectural photography. Carlos discovered that May had a quick wit and an infectious laugh that made him want to spend the rest of his life trying to earn it. She learned that beneath his business facade, Carlos was thoughtful, well-read, and surprisingly funny when he allowed himself to relax. They were halfway through the main course when the lights went out. Not just in the restaurant, but everywhere. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, they could see the entire city grid going dark in rolling waves, a blackout that would later be attributed to a massive electrical failure at the main power station. Emergency lighting kicked in briefly, then failed as well, leaving the restaurant in near-complete darkness, except for the flickering candles on each table. "Ladies and gentlemen," the restaurant manager announced, "we're experiencing a citywide power outage. We'll continue service by candlelight for those who wish to remain, but we understand if you need to leave to check on family or get home safely." Carlos's first instinct was to apologize, to suggest they leave, to somehow fix this unexpected disruption to their perfect evening. But when he looked across the table at May in the gentle candlelight, her face golden and mysterious in the dancing shadows, he found himself hoping she would want to stay. "What do you think?" he asked. "We could try to get a taxi, though I imagine they'll be scarce with the traffic lights out. Or we could—" "Stay," May said without hesitation. "If that's okay with you. This is actually kind of romantic, don't you think?" The word romantic coming from her lips made Carlos's heart skip several beats. "Yes," he managed, "very romantic." What followed was the most magical 3 hours of Carlos's life. With the distractions of modern technology eliminated and the formal atmosphere of the restaurant softened by candlelight, their conversation took on an intimacy that Carlos had never experienced. They talked about dreams and fears, about the loneliness that success could bring, about the way loss could shape a person's entire approach to life. "I've never told anyone this," May said as they shared a dessert they were eating slowly to make the evening last longer. But sometimes I wonder if I'm using my career to avoid getting too close to people. After my parents died, I threw myself into taking care of Zion, building my business, staying busy. Maybe because staying busy meant I didn't have to risk losing anyone else important to me. Her honesty took Carlos's breath away. I understand that, he said, his voice softer than usual. I think I've been doing the same thing with business. Staying busy, staying focused on things I could control, avoiding this. This, May asked, her honey eyes reflecting the candlelight. Carlos gestured between them, his heart pounding as he prepared to be more vulnerable than he had ever been in his life. Caring about someone enough that losing them would matter. Wanting someone so much that it changes everything about how you see the world. May set down her fork, giving him her complete attention. Carlos, I know this is probably too much, too fast, he continued, the words rushing out before his courage could abandon him. I know you're my trainer, and this is complicated, and I have no idea what I'm doing because I've never felt anything like this before, about anyone. The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Carlos felt exposed, terrified, completely at her mercy. He had just admitted not only his feelings, but his inexperience, his complete lack of romantic history, his vulnerability. What are you saying? May asked gently, and Carlos could hear something in her voice that might have been hope, though the candlelight made it impossible to read her expression clearly. Carlos took a deep breath, knowing that what he said next would either open a door to something beautiful or close it forever. I'm saying that I think about you constantly, that you're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I fall asleep. That spending time with you has become the best part of every day, and the thought of not seeing you anymore makes me feel like I can't breathe properly. He paused, gathering courage for the most important part. I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, May. Actually, I think I'm already completely in love with you, and I have no idea how to handle that because I've never been in love before. I've never even been close, but with you everything is different. Everything matters more. The silence that followed felt eternal. Carlos watched May's face in the flickering candlelight, trying to read her expression, preparing himself for gentle rejection or awkward withdrawal. Instead, he saw something that made his heart stop completely. Tears. Gentle tears that caught the candlelight as they traced paths down her cheeks. May, he said, reaching across the table instinctively. Are you okay? I'm sorry if I said too much, if I made you uncomfortable. She caught his hand in both of hers, her touch warm and firm and reassuring. You didn't make me uncomfortable, Carlos. You made me feel something I wasn't expecting to feel. What? He asked, hardly daring to hope. Like maybe I'm not the only one who's been confused about what's happening between us, she said, her voice soft but steady. Like maybe this amazing, kind, successful man who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me feel beautiful when he looks at me. Maybe he's been feeling the same overwhelming, terrifying, wonderful thing that I've been feeling. Carlos felt like the world had shifted on its axis. You feel it too? I feel it too, she confirmed, her smile radiant even in the dim light. I'm falling in love with you, Carlos Lara. Despite all the reasons why it's complicated, despite the professional boundaries we're crossing, despite the fact that we come from completely different worlds, I'm falling in love with your kindness, your intelligence, your vulnerability, and yes, the way you look at me like I'm the most beautiful woman you've ever seen. You are, Carlos said without hesitation. You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, but you're also so much more than that. You're brilliant and strong and compassionate, and you make me want to be worthy of you. You already are, May said, squeezing his hands. You already are. When their first kiss happened, it was as natural as breathing and as momentous as the first sunrise. Carlos leaned across the table. May met him halfway, and in the gentle glow of candlelight, with the city dark around them and the world reduced to just the two of them, their lips met in a kiss that was soft, sweet, and filled with all the emotion that had been building between them for weeks. Carlos had never kissed anyone before, but somehow, with May, it felt perfect. Her lips were warm and soft, and when she smiled against his mouth, he felt like he could conquer armies or move mountains or do anything that would keep her looking at him with such wonder and affection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing a little unsteadily, Carlos felt transformed. The nervous, inexperienced man who had been terrified to ask her to dinner had been replaced by someone confident in the knowledge that his feelings were returned, that this beautiful, incredible woman had chosen him despite his inexperience, despite the complications, despite everything. "What happens now?" he asked, still holding her hands across the table. "Now," May said, her smile radiant and full of promise. "We figure it out together." The power came back on just as they were leaving the restaurant, but Carlos barely noticed. He had found a different kind of illumination in May's eyes, in her returned affection, in the promise of a future that suddenly seemed bright enough to light the entire world. Chapter 7. Love in the Spotlight. Burns brighter and hotter. The paparazzi photograph captured the exact moment Carlos looked at May like she was his entire universe, which, unfortunately, was exactly how he felt. 3 weeks after their candlelit confession at Oceana, Carlos and May had fallen into a rhythm that felt like living in a beautiful dream. Their morning training sessions had transformed into something equal parts fitness and foreplay, professional exercise punctuated by stolen kisses, careful touches that lingered beyond necessity, and heated glances that made Carlos grateful for the privacy of his penthouse gym. Their relationship had evolved with the intensity of people making up for lost time. Carlos, who had never experienced the everyday magic of sharing life with someone, approached each moment with May like a man discovering color after a lifetime of monochrome. He wanted to give her everything, not just material gifts, though those continued appearing with thoughtful regularity, but experiences, attention, and the kind of devotion that came from a heart learning to love for the first time. May had begun staying for breakfast every morning, their conversations growing deeper and more intimate with each passing day. Carlos learned that she hummed while she made coffee, that she read poetry when she was stressed, that she had a scar on her left shoulder from falling out of a tree when she was 8. She discovered that Carlos spoke 3 languages fluently, that he had a photographic memory for architectural details, that he became adorably flustered whenever she complimented his appearance. The physical side of their relationship had developed with the sweet tension of 2 people learning each other's rhythms. Carlos's inexperience, rather than being a barrier, had become part of what made their connection so electric. Every touch was a discovery, every kiss was a revelation. Every moment of intimacy carried the weight of firsts and the promise of infinite possibilities. They had been careful to keep their relationship private, meeting primarily at Carlos's penthouse or small, intimate restaurants where they were unlikely to encounter business associates or clients. May had been particularly cautious about maintaining professional boundaries with her other clients, not wanting her relationship with Carlos to affect her reputation in the fitness community. But love, Carlos was learning, had a way of making itself known despite the best efforts at discretion. The charity gala had been planned for months, an annual fundraiser for pediatric cancer research that Carlos attended every year, more out of social obligation than genuine enthusiasm. This year was different. This year he had wanted May beside him, wanted to share the experience with someone who would appreciate not just the elegant setting, but the genuine good being done by the organization. "Are you sure?" May had asked when he invited her. "Won't people ask questions? Make assumptions?" "Let them," Carlos had replied, surprising himself with his certainty. "I want you there, May. I want to share this with you." May had been breathtaking in a midnight blue gown that complemented her skin tone perfectly and made Carlos feel like the luckiest man alive. They had been careful throughout the evening to maintain appropriate public distance, but Carlos found it impossible to completely hide his feelings. Every time he looked at her, every time she smiled at something he said, every time her hand briefly touched his arm during conversation, he felt like he was glowing from within. The photograph that would change everything was taken during the cocktail hour. Carlos had been listening to May talk with Dr. Sarah Kim, the pediatric oncologist who ran the research program they were supporting. May's passion for helping underserved communities had sparked an immediate connection with Dr. Kim's work, and watching her engage so genuinely with the cause had made Carlos's chest tight with pride and love. When May laughed at something Dr. Kim said, her head tilted back, her eyes sparkling with genuine delight, Carlos had been unable to stop himself from staring. In that moment, every defense he had ever built around his heart was visible on his face. The photographer working the room for the society pages had captured that exact instant. Carlos gazing at May with such obvious adoration that even a stranger could see he was completely, hopelessly in love. The photo appeared in the style section of the Sunday Times with the caption, "Real estate mogul Carlos Lara and fitness trainer May Greta at Saturday's Pediatric Cancer Research Gala. The look of love." By Monday morning, the image had been picked up by gossip blogs, society websites, and business publications curious about the personal life of one of the city's most eligible bachelors. The headlines ranged from romantically speculative, "Billionaire's mystery woman," to more problematic, "Lara's latest, gold digger or true love." Carlos first learned about the media attention from his assistant Jennifer, who appeared in his office at 7 a.m. with a stack of newspapers and printouts from various websites. "Sir," she said carefully, "there's been some media coverage of your attendance at Saturday's gala. You might want to see this before your 8 a.m. meeting." Carlos's blood ran cold as he saw the photograph. Not because he was embarrassed by his obvious feelings, he wasn't, but because he knew what this kind of attention could mean for May. She valued her privacy, had built her business on professional reputation and word-of-mouth recommendations. The last thing she needed was to become tabloid fodder because of her relationship with him. His phone was already ringing when Jennifer left his office. David Chen, his business partner, calling to warn him about the coverage. His father's assistant requesting a meeting to discuss recent developments. 3 reporters asking for comments about his relationship status. But Carlos's primary concern was May. He tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He texted her, asking if she was okay, if she had seen the coverage, if she needed anything. No response. By noon, the story had evolved beyond a simple society page coverage. Business journals were speculating about whether Carlos's distraction might affect his ongoing battle with Harrison Blackwell over the Meridian Tower. Gossip sites were digging into May's background, publishing details about her business, her clients, even her brother's medical school attendance. The comments sections were brutal. While many people found the photo romantic and expressed happiness for Carlos, others were less kind. May's race became a focal point for ugly speculation about her motives. Her profession was twisted into implications about gold digging and social climbing. The class difference between them was dissected with the kind of gleeful malice that made Carlos sick to his stomach. Carlos left the office early, something he never did, driven by the need to see May, to make sure she was all right, to protect her from whatever fallout his public feelings had created. He found her at her apartment, finally answering the door after his 3rd round of knocking. She looked tired, stressed, and when she saw him, something flickered across her face that might have been relief or regret. He couldn't tell which. "May," he said, stepping into her apartment, a modest but beautiful space that reflected her personality perfectly. "I've been trying to reach you. Are you okay? Have you seen—" "I've seen it," she said quietly, closing the door behind him. "All of it. The photo, the articles, the comments. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. I've had 3 clients cancel appointments, and Mrs. Henderson next door asked me if I was really that kind of girl when I got home from grocery shopping." Carlos felt rage building in his chest, not at May, but at the world that could take something beautiful and twist it into something ugly. "I'm sorry," he said, reaching for her hands. "I'm so sorry this happened. I'll fix it. I'll hire a PR firm, make statements, do whatever it takes to—" "Carlos." May's voice stopped him mid-sentence. "That's not how this works. You can't just throw money at this and make it go away. This is my life, my reputation, my business that's being affected." "Then what do you want me to do?" he asked, desperate to find a solution, to protect her from consequences that were entirely his fault for being unable to hide his feelings. May was quiet for a long moment, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "I don't know," she finally said. "I need some time to think about what this means, about whether we can handle this kind of attention." The words hit Carlos like physical blows. "What do you mean whether we can handle it?" "May, I love you. I don't care what anyone says or thinks about us." "But I do care," she said, and her voice was soft but firm. "I care about my business, about my reputation, about being able to walk down the street without people staring and whispering. I care about being judged not for who I am, but for what I represent to people who don't know anything about me." Carlos felt panic rising in his chest. "Are you saying you want to end this? End us?" "I'm saying I need time to figure out if we can make this work in the real world, not just in the private bubble of your penthouse," May replied. "This isn't going away, Carlos. This is what dating you means: public scrutiny, media attention, people making assumptions about my motives and our relationship." "I'll protect you," Carlos said desperately. "I'll hire security. I'll threaten lawsuits against anyone who publishes lies about you. I'll—" "You can't protect me from people's opinions," May said gently, "and I need to decide if I'm strong enough to handle them." That night, alone in his penthouse, Carlos understood for the first time that love wasn't just about the feelings between 2 people. It was about the world they had to live in, the judgments they had to face, the strength they needed to maintain their connection against forces that wanted to tear it apart. He stood at his windows, looking out at the city lights, and realized that the most important battle of his life wasn't happening in boardrooms or financial markets. It was happening in the heart of the woman he loved, as she decided whether their love was worth the price the world demanded her to pay for it. Chapter 8. When Love Faces Its Greatest Test. Roberto Lara had destroyed many things in his quest for power, but he'd never tried to destroy his son's first taste of happiness. Until now. The media attention following their public debut had been challenging, but Carlos had been confident they could weather it together. He had hired discreet security to ensure May's safety, threatened legal action against publications that crossed into defamation, and used his considerable influence to minimize the most egregious coverage. What he hadn't anticipated was the much more personal and devastating attack that would come from within his own family. Roberto Lara returned from his month-long European business trip on a Tuesday morning, arriving at Carlos's office unannounced with the confidence of a man who owned half the building and most of his son's future. At 68, Roberto remained imposing, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and possessed of the kind of presence that silenced boardrooms upon entry. He had built the Lara real estate empire from modest beginnings into a multi-billion-dollar dynasty, and he had very specific ideas about what was required to maintain that legacy. Carlos was in a strategy meeting about the Meridian Tower when his assistant Jennifer knocked and entered with an expression of barely concealed panic. "Sir," she said carefully, "your father is here. He says it's urgent." Carlos felt his stomach drop. Roberto's definition of urgent usually involved either enormous opportunities or catastrophic problems, and given the timing of his unexpected visit, Carlos suspected this fell into the latter category. "Gentlemen," Carlos said to his legal team, "let's reconvene this afternoon. I need to speak with my father." Roberto entered the conference room like a storm front, his presence immediately dominating the space. He waited until Carlos's advisors had filed out before speaking, his eyes taking in the financial documents scattered across the table, the stress lines around his son's eyes, the general atmosphere of a man under siege. "You look terrible," Roberto said without preamble. "When did you last sleep?" Actually sleep, not just lie in bed worrying about Blackwell's latest maneuvers. "I'm handling the Meridian situation," Carlos replied, recognizing his father's tactical approach. Roberto always began with practical concerns before moving to whatever was really bothering him. "Are you?" Roberto moved to the windows overlooking the city, his back to Carlos. "Because from what I'm hearing, your focus has been divided lately." Carlos felt the conversation shifting into dangerous territory. "If you're referring to the media coverage from last weekend, I'm referring to the fact that my son, the heir to a business empire worth over $2 billion, is making front-page news because he can't control his emotions around his fitness trainer." Roberto turned, and Carlos saw something in his father's expression that was harder and colder than usual disappointment. "Do you have any idea what this kind of distraction looks like to our competitors, to our investors, to the banks that hold our credit lines?" "My personal life has nothing to do with our business operations," Carlos said, but even as he spoke, he knew the argument was weak. In their world, everything was connected. Personal scandals became business liabilities. Private decisions had public consequences. "Your personal life has everything to do with our business when it's splashed across every gossip site and society page in the city," Roberto shot back. "Harrison Blackwell is using this coverage to paint you as immature, distracted, unfit to manage serious assets. He's telling investors that you're more interested in your trainer than in protecting their investments." Carlos felt anger building in his chest. "Blackwell will say anything to further his takeover attempt. My relationship with May has no bearing on my professional competence." "Your relationship with May," Roberto repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Tell me, Carlos, what exactly do you know about this woman? About her background, her motivations, her real reasons for pursuing a relationship with someone worth $500 million? "I know everything I need to know," Carlos said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "I know she's intelligent, compassionate, hard-working, and genuine. I know she makes me happy in ways I never thought possible." Roberto's expression softened slightly, but not with warmth. With something that looked almost like pity. "Son, you're 32 years old and you've never had a serious relationship. You have no experience with women who might see you as an opportunity rather than a person. How can you be certain her feelings are genuine?" "Because I know her," Carlos said firmly. "I've seen her with her clients, with her brother, in situations that have nothing to do with money or status." "She's not what you're implying." "Maybe not," Roberto conceded. "But even if her feelings are genuine now, what happens when the novelty wears off? When she realizes what it really means to be part of this family, to live under constant scrutiny, to have every aspect of her life examined and judged? People from her background don't usually adapt well to our world, Carlos. The cultural differences, the social expectations, the pressure." Her background? Carlos's voice was dangerously quiet. What exactly are you trying to say about her background? Roberto had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I'm saying that successful relationships require compatibility on multiple levels: social, cultural, economic. The differences between you and this woman are significant, and those differences tend to become more problematic over time, not less. Carlos stared at his father, recognizing the careful language but hearing the underlying message clearly. Roberto's objections to May weren't just about timing or business concerns. They were about class, about race, about his fundamental belief that Carlos should marry within their predetermined social circle. You don't know anything about her, Carlos said, his voice tight with controlled anger. You haven't spent 5 minutes in her company, but you've already decided she's not good enough for our family. I've decided that she's a distraction you can't afford right now, Roberto replied. And if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit that this relationship has already cost you. Missed opportunities, damaged reputation, questions about your judgment. How much more are you willing to sacrifice? The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Roberto systematically attacking every aspect of Carlos's relationship with May: her profession, her background, the media attention, the business implications. By the time his father left, Carlos felt emotionally battered and deeply angry, but also more certain than ever that May was worth fighting for. What Carlos didn't know was that Roberto's visit to his office was only the first phase of a more comprehensive campaign. 2 days later, May was leaving her morning session with Mrs. Elizabeth Morrison, an elderly client who had been working with May for over a year to recover from hip replacement surgery, when she found Roberto Lara waiting beside her car. He was impeccably dressed, as always, and his smile was warm and paternal in a way that immediately put May on guard. "Miss Greta," he said, approaching with the confident stride of a man accustomed to commanding attention. "I'm Roberto Lara, Carlos's father. I was hoping we might have a conversation." May's first instinct was to politely decline and leave immediately. Every survival instinct she had developed growing up in a world where wealthy, powerful men were often dangerous told her that this conversation would not end well for her. But curiosity and a desire to understand the man who had shaped Carlos kept her from getting into her car. "What did you want to talk about?" she asked, keeping her distance and her car keys ready in her hand. "My son," Roberto said simply, "and the situation you've both found yourselves in." Roberto suggested coffee at a small cafe nearby, somewhere public enough to ensure May felt safe, but private enough for honest conversation. Against her better judgment, May agreed, telling herself that understanding Carlos's father might help her understand the complicated dynamics of the family she was potentially becoming part of. Roberto was charming, she had to admit. He asked about her business, her background, her goals with genuine interest and apparent respect. He spoke about Carlos with obvious love and pride, sharing stories about his son's intelligence, his business acumen, his potential for greatness. For nearly an hour, May began to think she had misjudged him, that perhaps the protective father was simply trying to get to know the woman his son cared about. Then Roberto's approach shifted, subtly but unmistakably. "Carlos has never been in love before," Roberto said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "I'm sure he's told you that. He's also never had to navigate a relationship under public scrutiny, never had to balance personal happiness with professional responsibility in quite this way. It's been challenging," May admitted carefully. "I imagine it has been particularly challenging for you," Roberto continued. "The media attention, the speculation about your motivations, the impact on your business. That must be very difficult to handle." May nodded, unsure where the conversation was heading, but sensing the shift in Roberto's tone. "The thing is," Roberto said, his voice taking on a more serious quality, This level of attention is only going to intensify if your relationship with Carlos continues. Marriage to someone in his position means a lifetime of scrutiny, of having every decision examined and judged. It means giving up any hope of a private life, of being seen as an individual rather than as an extension of the Lara family legacy. I understand that, May said, though she was beginning to suspect this conversation was heading somewhere she wouldn't like. Roberto reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, placing it on the table between them. I want to be very clear that I think you're a lovely young woman, and I believe your feelings for Carlos are genuine. But I also think you deserve better than what this relationship can realistically offer you. May stared at the envelope, her stomach sinking as she realized what this was. What's in there? A way for you to start over, Roberto said gently. Somewhere else with enough resources to build whatever kind of life you want, without the complications that come with being involved with my family. $3 million, Ms. Greta. Enough to open that wellness center you've dreamed about, to ensure your brother finishes medical school without debt, to give yourself the freedom to find love with someone who can offer you a normal life. The words hit May like physical blows. $3 million. More money than she had ever imagined having. Enough to solve every financial concern she had ever had. Enough to secure her future and Zion's future in ways that years of hard work might never accomplish. But it was also a bribe. Payment for disappearing from Carlos's life, for walking away from the man she loved, for accepting that she wasn't good enough for the Lara family's standards. You want me to leave him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want you to consider what's best for both of you, Roberto replied. Carlos is facing the most challenging period of his professional life. This relationship, no matter how genuine, is weakening his position when he needs to be strongest. And you deserve someone who can offer you a partnership of equals, not a relationship where you'll always be seen as the outsider who doesn't quite belong. May looked at the envelope again, then at Roberto's face. She saw no malice there, no cruelty, just the calculating certainty of a man who believed he was solving a problem in the most efficient way possible. And if I don't take this, she asked. Roberto's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a subtle edge. Then you'll both continue to pay the price for a relationship that can't survive the pressures it's already under. Carlos will continue to be distracted and vulnerable when he needs to be focused and strong. You'll continue to face scrutiny and judgment that will only intensify with time. Eventually, the strain will break you apart anyway, but not before it's damaged you both. May stood up from the table, leaving the envelope untouched. You don't know me at all, she said quietly, and you don't know your son as well as you think you do. Perhaps not, Roberto replied, standing as well. But I know this world, Ms. Greta. I know what it takes to survive in it, and I know what it costs. Think about what I've offered. Think about what you really want your life to look like. May left the cafe without taking the envelope, but Roberto's words followed her home. $3 million, a new life, freedom from the scrutiny and judgment that had already begun to affect her business and her peace of mind. That evening, when Carlos called to ask about dinner plans, May found herself unable to meet his eyes when she arrived at his penthouse. The envelope might still be sitting on a cafe table, but the conversation with his father had planted seeds of doubt that were already beginning to grow. For the first time since she had fallen in love with Carlos Lara, May began to wonder if love would be enough to overcome the forces aligned against them. Chapter 9. Love Fights Back with the Fury of the Pure-Hearted. Carlos had never raised his voice to his father until the moment he discovered Roberto had tried to buy away the only thing that had ever made him feel alive. The change in May was subtle but unmistakable to someone who had memorized every nuance of her expressions, every variation in her voice, every subtle shift in her body language. For 3 days following Roberto's return, May had been different, distant in ways that had nothing to do with physical space, distracted even during their most intimate moments, and evasive whenever Carlos attempted to discuss their future. Her training sessions had become more businesslike, her conversation more surface level, her smiles less frequent and somehow forced. When Carlos suggested dinner plans or weekend activities, May found reasons to decline. When he asked about her day or clients, her responses were brief and carefully neutral. It was as if she was slowly, systematically withdrawing from their relationship while trying to maintain the appearance that nothing had changed. Carlos's initial response was panic. Had he moved too fast? Said something wrong? Was the media pressure finally taking its toll? He tried everything he could think of. More flowers, more thoughtful gifts, careful inquiries about whether she needed space or time, or anything he could provide. But nothing seemed to bridge the growing distance between them. The truth came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Kim, the pediatric oncologist from the charity gala, whom Carlos had begun supporting with significant donations to her research program. Dr. Kim called Carlos's office on Thursday afternoon with information that would change everything. "Carlos," she said without preamble when he took her call, "I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react. I saw your father having coffee with May Greta yesterday afternoon at the Bluebird Cafe on 5th Street. It looked intense." Carlos felt ice form in his stomach. "You're certain it was them?" "Absolutely certain. I know your father from various charity events, and I met May at the gala. Carlos, your father had an envelope with him. He put it on the table between them. May left without taking it, but the conversation looked serious. Confrontational, even." Carlos thanked Dr. Kim and hung up, his mind racing. Roberto had made contact with May directly, something he had never explicitly forbidden, but had never imagined his father would attempt. The envelope Dr. Kim had mentioned could only mean one thing. Roberto had made May some kind of offer, and given her recent behavior, Carlos suspected she was seriously considering it. Carlos left his office immediately, something he hadn't done since the crisis with Blackwell began, driven by a desperate need to find May and understand what his father had done. He tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He drove to her apartment, but she wasn't home. Finally, he went to the gym where she trained her group fitness classes and waited in the parking lot like a man stalking his own heart. When May emerged from the building, she looked surprised and slightly guilty to see him waiting by her car. "Carlos? What are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "I could ask you the same question," Carlos said, studying her face in the late afternoon light. "May, someone saw you having coffee with my father yesterday. I need to know what that was about." May's expression shifted from surprise to something that looked like resignation. "Who told you?" "Dr. Kim from the Research Foundation. She saw you both at the Bluebird Cafe." Carlos stepped closer, his voice gentle but urgent. "May, what did he want? What did he say to you?" For a moment, May looked like she might deny the meeting entirely. Then her shoulders sagged slightly, and Carlos saw something that looked like relief cross her face. "He offered me $3 million to leave you alone." The words hit Carlos like a physical blow. The amount was staggering, but the betrayal was even worse. His father had gone behind his back, had approached the woman he loved with a bribe, had tried to buy away the most important relationship Carlos had ever had. "3 million," Carlos repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him he didn't know me at all," May said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I left the money on the table and walked away." "But you've been thinking about it," Carlos said, and it wasn't a question. These past 3 days, you've been pulling away from me because you've been considering his offer." May's silence was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and tired. "Not the money, Carlos. I don't want his money. But the things he said, about the pressure never getting better, about me never really fitting into your world, about the damage this relationship is causing to your business and your reputation. He wasn't entirely wrong." Carlos felt rage building in his chest, not at May, but at his father, at the system that made someone like May doubt her worth, at himself for not protecting her from Roberto's calculated cruelty. What else did he say? He said you were facing the most challenging period of your professional life, and that being with me was making you vulnerable when you needed to be strong. May met his eyes for the first time in days. "Carlos, is that true? Is this relationship hurting your ability to fight Blackwell?" "No," Carlos said fiercely. "May, you're the only thing keeping me strong enough to fight at all. You're the reason I get up in the morning, the reason I care about winning, the reason any of this matters to me. But the media attention, the questions about your judgment, are temporary problems that will fade when people get used to seeing us together." Carlos reached for her hands, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. "May, my father sees everything as a business transaction. He thinks love is a weakness, emotion is inefficiency, and anything that can't be controlled or purchased is a threat. He's wrong about you, wrong about us, and wrong about what makes someone strong." May was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands. $3 million is a lot of money, Carlos. It's more than I'll probably make in my entire lifetime. "I know," Carlos said softly. "I also know that if money was what you cared about, you would have shown interest in me because of my wealth, not despite it. You've never asked me for anything, May. You've never even let me pay for dinner without arguing about it." "But what if he's right about the rest of it?" May asked, and Carlos heard the vulnerability in her voice. "What if I really don't fit in your world? What if I'm not strong enough to handle the scrutiny, the judgment, the constant questions about whether I'm good enough?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Carlos said, echoing her words from their first night. "May, I don't care about my father's opinion or society's expectations or anyone else's definition of who I should be with. I care about you. I love you. And I need you to know that walking away won't make the pressure stop. It will just mean we're facing it separately instead of together." That evening, Carlos drove to his father's house for the first time in 6 months. Roberto lived in a mansion that reflected his success and his solitude, 20,000 square feet of marble and mahogany, filled with priceless art and absolutely no warmth. Roberto was in his study when Carlos arrived, reviewing financial documents with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else. "Carlos," Roberto said, looking up from his papers, "this is unexpected. I thought you'd be too busy with your trainer to visit your old man." The casual cruelty in his father's voice was the spark that ignited Carlos's rage. "How dare you?" Carlos said, his voice low and dangerous. "How dare you approach May behind my back? How dare you try to bribe her to leave me?" Roberto's expression didn't change. "So she told you about our conversation. I wondered if she would." "You offered her $3 million, Carlos continued, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay controlled. "You tried to buy the woman I love like she was a piece of real estate or a business competitor." "I offered her a solution to a problem that was hurting both of you," Roberto replied calmly. "And I noticed she didn't take the money, which suggests she has more sense than I initially credited her with." "She didn't take the money because she's not for sale," Carlos said, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "She's not some gold digger looking for a payday. She's the woman I want to spend my life with, and you nearly drove her away with your manipulation." Roberto finally looked up from his documents, giving Carlos his full attention. Son, you're 32 years old and you've never been in love before. You have no perspective, no experience to judge whether this relationship is sustainable or just infatuation. And you have no right to make that decision for me, Carlos shot back. I'm not a child and my personal life is not your business to manage. Your personal life becomes my business when it affects our family's reputation and our business interests, Roberto said, his voice taking on the hard edge that had intimidated Carlos throughout his childhood. This woman has already caused media speculation, business complications, and questions about your judgment. How much more damage are you willing to accept? Carlos stared at his father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Roberto was brilliant, successful, and completely incapable of understanding that some things were more valuable than money, or reputation, or business interests. You destroyed yourself after Mom died, Carlos said quietly, his voice steady but filled with pain. You threw yourself into business, into accumulating wealth and power, because it was easier than dealing with grief. You taught me to do the same thing, to value success over happiness, control over connection, reputation over love. But May is teaching me something different. What? Roberto asked, and for the first time his composure seemed to crack slightly. That being alive means more than just being successful, Carlos replied. That having someone to share your life with is worth any amount of public scrutiny. That love isn't a weakness to be managed or eliminated. It's the only thing that makes all the rest of it meaningful. Carlos moved toward the door, then turned back to face his father one last time. If you ever approach May again, if you ever try to interfere in our relationship again, I will walk away from Lara Enterprises completely. I'll liquidate my shares, start over somewhere else, and you can build your empire alone. May is not negotiable, Dad. She's not a business problem to be solved. She's the woman I'm going to marry, and if you can't accept that, then you're going to lose your son. Carlos left his father's house with his hands shaking from adrenaline and his heart pounding with the certainty that he had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But for the first time in his life, standing up to Roberto felt less like rebellion and more like finally becoming the man he was meant to be, the man who was worthy of May Greta's love. Chapter 10. Love builds its own beautiful empire. 1 year later, Carlos woke up the same way he had every morning since May agreed to marry him, grateful that dreams really could come true. The transformation had not been immediate or easy, but it had been complete. The months following Carlos's confrontation with Roberto had tested every aspect of their relationship, but rather than breaking them apart, the challenges had forged them into something stronger, more resilient, and ultimately unshakable. Roberto's interference had initially made May more determined to prove she wasn't driven by material concerns, but it had also opened honest conversations between her and Carlos about the real challenges they would face as a couple. They discussed class differences, frankly, addressed the racial dynamics that would always be part of their public narrative, and acknowledged the ways their relationship would continue to be scrutinized and judged. But they also talked about love being worth fighting for. Carlos had channeled his fury over his father's bribery attempt into action. Within a week of their confrontation, he had established the May Greta Foundation for Community Wellness, endowing it with an initial $50 million and naming May as executive director. The foundation's mission was to provide fitness, nutrition, and wellness education to underserved communities, exactly the vision May had described during their early morning conversations. This is too much, May had protested when Carlos presented her with the foundation documents. Carlos, I can't accept this. It's too big, too generous. People will say you're trying to buy me. People will always find something to say, Carlos had replied, taking her hands in his. Let them say you're a gold digger while you're changing children's lives through fitness education. Let them say I'm trying to buy your love while you're building wellness centers in communities that have never had access to quality health resources. Let them judge our motives while we prove them wrong through our actions. The foundation had become May's passion project, and surprisingly, Carlos's as well. He discovered that using his wealth to support causes he cared about was infinitely more satisfying than simply accumulating more of it. He attended community events, spoke at fundraisers, and learned about the real impact their work was having on families and children. The media attention shifted gradually from salacious speculation about their relationship to coverage of their philanthropic work. When photographs of Carlos and May appeared in newspapers now, they were often images of them volunteering at community fitness events, speaking at health education seminars, or celebrating the opening of new wellness centers in underserved neighborhoods. Roberto's acceptance had come slowly, grudgingly, but ultimately completely. The turning point had been Christmas dinner when Carlos brought May to the family gathering for the first time. Roberto had been formally polite but distant until May had asked him about the early days of building Lara Enterprises. For 2 hours, Roberto had held court, sharing stories about the challenges and triumphs of building a business empire, and May had listened with genuine interest and asked insightful questions. "She's not what I expected," Roberto had admitted to Carlos later that evening. "She's intelligent, articulate, and she clearly makes you happy in ways I hadn't seen before." "She makes me better," Carlos had replied. "She makes me want to be worthy of the life we're building together." By spring, Roberto had begun including May in family business discussions, valuing her perspective on community relations and corporate social responsibility. By summer, he was defending their relationship to business associates who still harbored doubts. By fall, he was openly proud of the Foundation's work and his son's transformation from a successful but solitary businessman into a man who had found balance between professional achievement and personal happiness. The proposal had happened in the penthouse gym where they had first met, on the anniversary of May's first training session. Carlos had prepared elaborate plans involving restaurants and ring presentations and romantic speeches. But in the end, the moment had been simpler and more perfect than anything he could have orchestrated. They had just finished their workout, and May was stretching on the mat, her body graceful and strong in the morning light. Carlos had been watching her as he did every morning, still amazed that this incredible woman had chosen to love him back, when the words simply came. "Marry me," he had said, dropping to his knees beside her mat. May had looked up at him, surprise and joy and love mixing in her honey-colored eyes. "What?" "Marry me," Carlos had repeated, pulling out the ring he had been carrying in his pocket for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I want to spend every morning for the rest of my life watching you exist in my space and make it better just by being there. I want to build something with you that's bigger than either of us could create alone. I want to have children with you and teach them that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Marry me, May." She had said yes while crying and laughing simultaneously, and the ring, a vintage Art Deco design with a center diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars, had fit perfectly. Their wedding 6 months later had been a masterpiece of beautiful contrasts. The ceremony took place in the botanical gardens where May used to run during college, with close family and friends witnessing their vows under ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. May's dress was elegant simplicity, silk and lace that moved like water when she walked, with a cathedral train that required her college roommates to help her navigate. Carlos wore a classic tuxedo, but his face as he watched May walk down the aisle was anything but composed. Zion, resplendent in his medical school graduation gown, he had graduated summa cum laude 2 weeks earlier, walked May down the aisle, and gave a best man speech that left half the wedding party in tears. Roberto gave a toast about love-changing people in ways that business success never could. Dr. Sarah Kim, representing the foundation board, spoke about the way love could expand beyond two people to improve entire communities. But the most beautiful moment had been Carlos's vows, delivered without notes in a voice that shook with emotion. "May," he had said, looking directly into her eyes while 200 guests faded into background noise, "you taught me that the heart is not a muscle to be strengthened through exercise, but a space to be opened through courage. You showed me that success without someone to share it with is just expensive loneliness. You proved to me that love isn't a distraction from building a meaningful life. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible." He had paused, his voice thick with tears that he wasn't ashamed to shed. "I promise to love you with the intensity of a man who waited 32 years to find his soulmate. I promise to support your dreams, to celebrate your successes, to comfort you during challenges, and to never stop being amazed that someone as extraordinary as you chose to build a life with someone like me. I promise to be worthy of your love every single day." Their honeymoon had been 3 weeks in Italy, where Carlos showed May architectural treasures, and May taught Carlos to slow down enough to actually enjoy the experiences money could provide. They had walked through olive groves and toured ancient ruins and made love in villa suites overlooking the Mediterranean. And Carlos had finally understood what people meant when they said some things were priceless. Now, 1 year into their marriage, Carlos woke up every morning in wonder. May slept beside him, her hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in the soft light filtering through their bedroom windows. She was 6 months pregnant with their first child, and her changing body was even more beautiful to Carlos than it had been when he first saw her. The baby, a daughter they had decided to name Maria, after Carlos's mother, moved constantly, as if she was as eager to meet them as they were to meet her. The penthouse had been transformed from a monument to solitude into a home filled with warmth and life. May's books filled the shelves, her photographs covered the refrigerator, her laughter echoed through rooms that had once known only silence. They were planning to move to a larger place before the baby arrived, somewhere with a yard and room for the chaos and joy that came with family life. The business empire continued to thrive, but it no longer consumed Carlos's identity. He worked normal hours, took real vacations, and delegated responsibilities to trusted partners so he could be present for the life he and May were building together. The Meridian Tower crisis had been resolved in their favor, partly because Carlos's newfound balance had made him a better negotiator, more strategic, and less emotionally reactive. Harrison Blackwell had eventually abandoned his takeover attempt, recognizing that Carlos was stronger, not weaker, with May's influence in his life. Roberto now considered May's insight essential to major business decisions, and their family dinners had become weekly celebrations of both professional success and personal happiness. The foundation had expanded beyond their initial vision, opening 12 wellness centers across the city and surrounding communities. May split her time between program development and direct service, still training individual clients, but also speaking at conferences and consulting with other organizations about community-based health initiatives. She glowed with the satisfaction of work that fed her soul as well as her bank account. But the most beautiful transformation was in Carlos himself. The lonely, inexperienced man who had stood at his penthouse windows, wondering about connection, had become someone who understood that love was not just an emotion, but a choice, a practice, a way of moving through the world with openness and vulnerability and hope. This morning, like every morning for the past year, Carlos woke up before May and spent a few minutes just watching her sleep, still amazed that she was his wife, still grateful that she had chosen to share her life with him. When she finally stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet his, Her first expression was always a smile, as if seeing him was the best possible way to start any day. "Good morning, husband," she said, stretching carefully around their growing daughter. "Good morning, wife," Carlos replied, leaning over to kiss her forehead, her cheek, her lips. "Good morning, baby girl," he added, placing his hand on May's rounded belly and feeling their daughter respond with a strong kick. "She's active today," May said, covering his hand with hers. "I think she's going to be a morning person like her daddy." "Or a fitness enthusiast like her mommy," Carlos suggested, feeling the baby move under their joined hands. As they lay there together, May's head on Carlos's shoulder, their daughter moving between them, Carlos thought about the man he had been just 2 years ago. That man couldn't have imagined this happiness, couldn't have conceived of love this deep, couldn't have dreamed of a future this beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" May asked, always attuned to his shifting moods and expressions. "How grateful I am," Carlos said simply. "How lucky, how completely, impossibly happy." "Just wait until she arrives," May said, patting her belly. "Then you'll understand what happiness really looks like." Carlos smiled, knowing that May was probably right, knowing that their love would continue to expand and deepen and transform them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But he also knew that he would never stop being amazed by the simple miracle of waking up next to the woman who had taught him what it meant to be fully, completely, beautifully alive. "I love you, May Lara," he said, using her married name with the same wonder he felt every time. "I love you too, Carlos Lara," she replied, and then added what she told him every single day. "Thank you for teaching me that fairy tales can come true when two people are brave enough to write their own." As morning light filled their bedroom and their daughter danced between them and the city came alive outside their windows, Carlos closed his eyes and felt the profound contentment of a man who had found everything he hadn't known he was looking for. Love had built its own empire in his heart, and he was the richest man alive. The end. As May's hand rested on her growing belly and Carlos's hand covered hers, he whispered what he told her every single day. "You are the most beautiful miracle that ever happened to me," and meant it more with each passing moment.